Okay, welcome. Here we are looking at Chapter 4, Wedding Bells or Not. So basically we're looking at marriage, or the variations in which families are formed. You know, as a society we value marriage, still, it's considered a norm. But we also have like sort of social arrangements, we have legal arrangements, and we even have religious relationships that look at these unions between people who commit to one another. But there is more than just one way to the route towards family life. And you're probably already aware of some other options. Maybe you are a part of a family where they're not the typical family as what we normally see as a marriage. In our society, most families are based on marriage. The relationship of the husband and wife usually forms the basis of all the interaction within the family. So the relationship between the husband and wife affects their immediate family, the children that they have, and how that family forms. The roles filled by partners, their levels of satisfaction, the way that they organize their family life, they all have an impact on the development of the children. So that includes the way we celebrate birthdays, the way we do traditions, what traditions we have, what routines in the family that we have, all impact children in the family, but it's based on the husband and the wife. The current alternative is marriage, of course, and being unmarried, cohabitation will be explored, as well as other forms and variations of family will be explored in this chapter. Because family patterns have changed in the past decades, especially in the shift from single earner to double earning families. We're also going to look at other family variations in terms of roles that the partners play. It's important to look at the changes in roles as well as the new strains experienced by couples today. Also in this chapter we're going to conclude by looking at what makes for long-lasting relationships. Because essentially when people choose to either marry or form a family, their intention isn't to do this for a short period of time. The hope and the expectation and the benefit to all society generally in terms of social policies, the children's well-being and success as a society is to have long-lasting, successful relationships that involve successfully raising children throughout their entire life. So we're going to look at this chapter, and I hope you enjoy it. Good luck, and we'll see you a little bit later.
Okay, when we think about a wedding ceremony, it really just has two basic functions in society. There's a public acknowledgement of the creation of a new family. It's a ritual that's organized by the family, and it marks the changes in status and the role among all the family members. And historically, the family has been the central organizational unit in almost all societies. Now in Canada, the proportion of married people who have been declining over the past decades, while the proportion of those who are divorced and those who are never married has been increasing. The cohabitation is becoming more and more acceptable among young adults. And then of course in 2005 same-sex marriage has become legal. So when we look at this sort of public acknowledgement and the ritual organization as being two major central organized components about what the role of family is, and in particular marriage. When we think about marriage, it's a legal and socially recognized union. The marriage, in a certain amount of prohibitive degrees, the Marriage Act, which has prohibitive degrees built into it, identifies people, as in brothers and sisters, who cannot marry. And the Civil Marriage Act defines marriage as a union of two people to the exclusion of all others, which we also call monogamy. That is, the two people being married and all others are excluded in terms of the marital relationship. That's called monogamy. In a society such as Canada, in which there is a high degree of divorce and remarriages, sociologists have coined a term that's called serial monogamy, which is describing a series of marriages to different partners, although only one at a time. So serial monogamy would be just having one relationship for a period of time, ending that one, starting another one, ending that one, starting another one, ending that one. Now there are other forms, polygamy being one that is also experienced in North America. It's a marriage of one person to more than one person of the opposite sex. And there's two forms of this. Polygyny is a marriage of one man to several wives. Since it is the most common form, many polygynous marriages are mistakenly called polygamous, a practice that many Muslim countries and some African societies encouraged by early Mormons in the U.S. Now, sorel polygyny is the marriage of one man to several wives who are sisters. And then polyandry is the marriage of one woman to several husbands, which, in most modern societies is relatively rare. Now, if you look at what we have here, this is also in your textbook. The marriage rate, that is a measure of marriages that occur within any given year, excluding common law unions that are already existing marriages. So this is new marriages. In 2008, 147,288 marriages occurred in Canada. At 4.4 marriages per 1,000 people, the marriage rate is at its lowest than it's been in the past century. Now, some of the explanations could clearly be, social, economic, and legal factors determine age at which people marry. The Great Depression, the rate reached almost 11 to 1,000, peaked in 1970 as the baby boom generation entered adulthood. And you can see those sorts of booms, if you will, when you look at World War II and then look again in around the 1970s. Today, first marriages occur later in life than it used to, and this is often based on women's greater educational levels. There's poor opportunities for young workers, and an increase in the proportion of couples living together before marriage. And so they get married a little later in life, if they get married at all. Marriage is a legal contract governed by the law, and in Canada, both partners must be 18 years or older. You may marry at age 16 with parental consent. The marriage of convenience, or a marriage where the sole purpose is for the spouse to immigrate to Canada, or legally in Canada. And then there's the same-sex marriages in Canada, and that was since 2005. Marriage brings with it both rights and duties. Partners have a right, to sexual access to each other, to be treated kindly, to expect faithfulness, to use family assets together. Partners have a responsibility to support each other and any children they might have. Divorce is granted if one partner refuses sex, has extramarital sexual relations, or is cruel towards the other. Some couples draw up a prenuptial agreement, a legal document that alters the effect of the law. Usually it applies to property, and this is an agreement that a couple would make in advance of ever having a divorce. Should a divorce occur, here's what we agree to do. If common law couples break up, rights to assets are often not very well defined by law, and as a result, some sign a cohabitation agreement as well. Now, marriage in the family cycle. Marriage once marked that it was an individual had reached adulthood and gained entry to approved sexual relations, cohabitation, parenthood. Today, marriage is no longer an official sign of adulthood. Marriages are delayed. The ability to support oneself financially is more of a marker of adulthood than what marriage is. Widely available contraceptives means that parenthood could be postponed. Women are now in the workforce, not necessarily dependent on men for support. From a developmental perspective, transitions into successful marriage involves a few items. One is essentially establishing a couple identity. And this is essentially where the marriage involves a commitment to the new family system. And it's often referred to as a we-ness or couplehood. And this new established relationship between husband and wife, they establish a couple identity. Then there's a second developmental transition. It's called defining their boundaries. And here's where couples who have lived together before marriage report that their marriage changes after, or their relationship changes after marriage. They have to learn to maintain a household and divvy up the responsibilities for childcare and housekeeping. Also keep in mind and manage their relationship. Husbands and wives who have been members of various microsystems must now renegotiate as a couple their relationships with these groups. This is in each other's families, for example. Intercultural marriages may make this adjustment more difficult for couples. Now, if we carry on in the same vein of thinking, mixed couples, this is opposite sex or same-sex couples, common law or married couples in which one spouse or partner is a member of a visible minority group and the other is not, as well as couples comprised of two different visible minority groups. So in 2006, nearly 4% of Canadian couples were mixed couples. Younger, better off socioeconomically, and more likely to live in large urban centers. We see this example because what often happens is the more diverse a population is, and we see that in the three major cities in Canada, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, there's a greater mix and intermingling of different people of different cultures in a more diverse population. And the more people intermix in terms of their associations, the more likely they are to see more common ground between them rather than the differences. So why do we marry? Well, marriage provides an enforceable trust. Legal provisions for support and sexual fidelity provided the couple a degree of security. Now, it doesn't guarantee anything. Socialized to regard marriage as superior to other kinds of adult relationships, for example, as non-sexual friendships, domestic partnerships, long-term cohabitation, and single-parented families. So if we think about how marriages have changed over time, from a more structural functionalist view, the family was a unit that was ensured survival of its members through separate roles between men and women. Men were out working and making the money, and women were at home looking after the children and maintaining the household. Now, feminists would point out that in societies where status and power are granted to men, and basically women are exploited. Now, there's been changes over time, and we don't see to the same degree this traditional family is not as acceptable. One outcome of the acceptance of the traditional family was the baby boom. Nonetheless, the principle that respectable women could work outside the home and had been established by this time. So by the 70s, income was not keeping pace with inflation, and the wife's pay was necessary to prevent the decline of the family's purchasing power. Today, marriage is more democratic. It's not totally democratic. You'll still find that women will do more of the household work, but men are starting to incorporate themselves more into that. It's a change that is happening, but it's happening gradually. Sociologists will point out that the effect of the two world wars, where women replaced men in the workplace and then returned to their traditional role, was creating a fairly significant conflict within family dynamics. Now we're going to look at different roles in marriages and how they've changed over time. We'll start with what would be considered the conventional roles in marriage. The conventional roles marriage is based on the structural functionalist viewpoint. Men and women have separate spheres of actions and who does what and responsibility in the household. As long as the marriage lasts and employment is secure, the conventional pattern has distinct advantages. However, there is very little security for women in this type of marriage. And in particular, as long as the marriage lasts, it's secure, but when the marriage breaks down, men will have pension plans to support themselves in old age. Women in this type of marriage often don't have either marketable skills or certainly don't have the protection of financial support. Some of the other advantages would include provides for specialized care for children in the home, which reflects the organization of society, where paid employment tends to become more and more specialized. And the biggest disadvantage is the little security for women and being a single earner, wage earner families, which make economic security very difficult to maintain. So what started to emerge was what's called a shared roles in marriage. And what I've demonstrated here is that typically full-time work was in the favor of men and part-time work in the favor of women. Here both partners work and share household responsibilities. Some of the shared families resemble conventional families because wives only work part-time, and a good number of the shared roles is in this sort of capacity. Although some women work full-time, the general notion is that men help with housework and women would be the provider, with the provider role persists. It's basically women are still doing the household responsibilities while at the same time doing some part-time work to help offset the economic difficulties. Now, a newer form of this shared roles is what's called dual career. And this is where the marriage is in which both partners are committed to their careers. The dual career couple are more likely to share equally both household responsibilities and the authority and power within the family. With children, these couples may sacrifice one career, at least for a while, or purchase household services like a nanny to care for the children. Now, in this instance, neither one of them is working part-time. Both of them have what would be considered professional careers. And so they often delay many aspects of what would be considered a typical family and family responsibilities, like having children. They would often delay that until they get, careers established, and then one or the other partner might reduce their time at work in order to look after the child as it starts to grow up, or, as I said, pay for a nanny to look after the child while they carry on with their careers. Another newer form of marriage roles is what's called reverse conventional. And here the wife is the breadwinner and the husband is the homemaker. Many men report how rewarding it is to develop a close relationship with their children, but they do face some stigma in the community for some, particularly from other men. Only when the husband highly respects the woman's work, or when the couple strongly believes in the equity in the relationship and more balance, does this work and work well. Often this arrangement is temporary. However, many men do see the value of what this does for their relationship with their children, when in the more conventional approach, men didn't see the importance of their relationship with their children until they retired and spent much time trying to retrieve their relationship with their children. Now, these are marriage rules, but they're not exclusive to marriage, and we're going to move into looking at cohabitation. And in Canada, cohabitation increasingly is accepted, especially among younger people. Common law union, a union of two partners in a lasting relationship resembling marriage. In 2011, 2.8 million Canadians aged 15 and older were involved in cohabitated relationships. Now, just for your information, when they reference things like 15 and older, they're referencing a sociological data point where they look at age at which a person, a woman in particular, is able to produce a child, and 15 to 45 is considered that range. That doesn't mean that the expectation is, nor that the demographic is involved in relationships where children are born. It is just a statistical point, a point of measure that is done worldwide. And so that 2.8 million Canadians in cohabitated agreement, that makes 15.4% of all census families, and that proportion has doubled over the last 2 decades. So for cohorts born before 1960, that means age-grouped people born before 1960, the proportion of cohabitating couples is also increasing. And that suggests that many people are choosing to cohabitate instead of remarrying after divorce or widowhood. And so if we look at the statistics, the data here, Canadians generally view cohabitation as a prelude to marriage rather than a substitute for it. Most, but not all. A notable exception is in Quebec, where they believe that common law is a distinct alternative to marriage. Federally, those living together, that is the federal government-wise, those living together for 1 year can receive couple benefits. However, each province sets its own condition for common law status. So there's not a universal across Canada conditions for common law. Common law union can be the same sex or opposite sex and does not make a difference for legal purposes. Often cohabitating couples don't have the same property rights as married couples, and this is where it varies from province to province. In some ways, cohabitation and marriage are alike. They both involve romantic relationships. They pool their income and expenses typically, and child rearing is shared, and the benefits of the emotional support within a couplehood. The difference is, of course, is that marriage tends to be more permanent in terms of statistically, at least. There's no waiting period for legal rights and responsibilities to apply as when couples live in common law. Common law cannot be governed by the same social expectations. Cost of leaving are seen as lower than marital separation or divorce. That is to say, typically, common law that goes through a separation, there isn't a lot of the costs associated with separating as there is in marriage. And people who had romantic and sexual intercourse younger are more likely to cohabitate later. Now, the other new shift in relationships and marriage began in 2005, and that was the same-sex marriages. Legalization of same-sex marriage seems to have made it more socially acceptable. Before 2005, 49% of Canadians supported it. And 61% after 2009 supported it. Some family members who were opposed to support were more inclined to if a couple had been legally married as opposed to cohabitating. So until 2005, although same-sex couples had gained many of the same rights as other cohabitators, they had no further stage possible in their relationship because they weren't allowed to marry. Same-sex couples chose marriage for the same reasons as heterosexual couples do: the opportunity to create families through adoption, and to automatically care for the partner in case of illness and injury, and to act on the other legal matters that they experience as a couple. Now, if we shift away from just the types of marriages into married happiness, we can look at a number of elements in here as well. When we enter a relationship, we bring our personality and our past history with us. Sex role identity appears to be associated with an adjustment in marriage. A decline in traditional gender roles is related to greater marital happiness. That is to say, more balance in a relationship increases marital happiness. Partners who are emotionally healthy have higher levels of empathy, and interpersonal skills are more accurately interpreted in their messages to their partners and the way that they communicate to each other. Relationship style of couples is related to both problem solving and marital satisfaction. And the perception of partners, of each other, and as a couple is also very important. So spending a long time talking, however, does not necessarily mean that the couple's communication is effective. It's not just how much you talk, it's how well you talk and are understood with one another. Nonverbal communication may be more important than what each partner actually says. So the way we communicate, both verbally and non-verbally, takes a lot of practice to learn what each other means, a lot of question asking, and a lot of effective listening. One of the best pieces of advice I was given is if you want to effect better communication, listen more rather than talk more. Effective communication depends on continued use of maintenance strategies. When I say maintenance strategy, we're talking about being positive or helpful when one partner is tired, cross, or otherwise negative, rather than just jumping to conclusions. To practice and use communication, both verbally and non-verbally, to come to better understandings of one another's circumstances. Disagreement in marriage is probably reduced by homogamy. That is, the more similar we are to one another. When we look for partners who are more like us as opposed to opposite to us, we probably have greater ability to resolve disagreements. Verbal disagreements tend to be higher when couples are having problems with their marriage. No kidding. But the key to success in this is better quality communication, not more words or louder words. So when we think about happily married, we also think in terms of conflict styles. Individuals have different conflict styles. The most successful in dealing with differences are those that de-escalate conflict instead of feeding the anger. So the more we listen and stay on the same topic to resolve it rather than drifting all over the place and confusing dialogue, those who trade anger for anger are more likely to set off a vicious cycle. The balance between conflict and pleasant aspects of a marriage is also very important. Every negative interaction should be balanced by 4 or 5 positive ones. It's not like you need to keep a table and a track of what's going on, but ensuring that we're doing what we can to build positively a relationship rather than only seemingly talking when we're having conflicts. Extended family members, they can have an impact on a couple's marital happiness. Relatives of gay and lesbian individuals may accept or reject their child and his or her partner, and that can be true of heterosexual couples as well. Couples who live in areas with high levels of welfare and poverty may also suffer from chronic stress. And that just makes sense given the kinds of stress associated with tough economic times. Studies show that levels of happiness are highest in early marriage, rising at the first child's birth, and then dropping with teenagers in the family and increasing when children leave home and couples live without them. However, happiness never reaches a high level early on. Other studies found that happiness declines over time. However, the amount of decrease was related to the couple's happiness at the beginning of the research. Now, there are some factors that relate to the drop of marital satisfaction when children are in the home. Birth of the first child is usually experienced as a high, and in many ways similar to a honeymoon. New parents, however, soon need to face the realities of the day-to-day living with an infant. Demands of the new child put on the parents can affect their relationship. Interrupted sleep is a very big one, and if you don't get your sleep and it's interrupted a lot, it affects your mood the next day. Conflicts over child rearing, the differences in permissiveness and who does more work. The presence of children significantly influences decisions about who works and where families live. Factors related to drop in marital satisfaction when teenagers are in the home. Parents now have children who keep adult hours, which limits privacy. The strain can result when parents disagree on how to deal with the challenges of teenagers present. Children may also impose financial strain if they go on to post-secondary. Once children leave home, couples must adjust to living without children again, and frequently they must rebuild common interest between the two parents. If individuals in his or her social group condemns infidelity, it's less likely. Infidelity is more likely where opportunities for undiscovered encounters present themselves, along with these unresolved conflicts that result out of poor communication strategies. And we'll look at that in a little bit here. There are several criticisms of the life cycle view of marital satisfaction. Some of these are based on the fact that the surveys were conducted by asking people of different ages about their feelings, rather than following some couples over many years, doing a longitudinal study, for example. It may also be more important for couples who are older to report happiness than couples with children at home, because those with unhappy marriages have separated or divorced, and more are satisfied, are still together. The more satisfied ones are still at home. So looking at the types of marriages, and I'm not going to go through the details of these. You'll see them in your textbook. They're brief, but check them out. They're on page 113. But notice the distribution. You've got devitalized representing 40% of the marriages. Now, this data was collected by looking at 8,383 heterosexually married American couples and measured spouses' evaluation of the relationship among 9 dimensions. These dimensions included personality issues, communication, conflict resolution, financial management, leisure activities, sexual relationship, children and parenting, family and friends, and religious orientation. Then, identifying these 7 types of marriages came out of the data. Now, devitalized is basically a family relationship where the enthusiasm for the relationship has diminished, and staying together has been something that, out of convenience, out of comfort, it's not necessarily full of the kind of love that the couple experienced early on. But it represents 40% of the relationships or types of marriages. And so just be familiar with these types. It's an interesting little view of marriages. You know, successful marriages aren't all the same. There has been research that looks at not quite as many as this, 4 or 5 different marriage styles, and the research was saying that people in these different forms of marriages describe themselves as happy. It may not be something that when you look at the definition you go, oh, that sucks. I couldn't imagine myself being in that kind of relationship. The people in them are not saying they are unhappy. They are saying they are happy on some level at least. They're not seeing this as a bad thing. Otherwise they would divorce. They would go their own way. Now, when people do have troubles in marriage, one of the main reasons that troubles exist is infidelity in relationships. Sex outside the committed relationship ranges from one-night stands to long-term relationships, and can be only sexual, but they're not only sexual. Sometimes they're emotional or a combination of the two. Interaction with the internet lover may also lead to emotional withdrawal from a partner. Now, men are more likely to be unfaithful, although they're not the only ones who can be unfaithful. And through recent studies shows the rate for men and women of becoming more alike. For men, being married or cohabitating has no significant effect on predicting infidelity. Married women are less likely to be unfaithful. More highly educated people more likely to report engaging in infidelity. Infidelity is the single most cited cause for divorce. Cohabitators are more likely than married to be part. Can result in rage, loss of trust, fear, lower self-esteem. Men are more likely to be angry and jealous over sexual aspects. Women are likelier to be jealous over emotional aspects. Now, married happiness throughout a life is possible, and there's some very important components about being happy throughout a life. When a marriage encounters rough times, other factors become important, and one of the first is commitment. When commitment is not enough, forgiveness becomes important in repairing a marriage, especially when there's been a serious betrayal such as infidelity. Now, that doesn't mean everyone is capable of doing so, and part of that has to do with ourselves as individual people and what we have experienced in our past. So scholars have also identified another component, and that is what's called sanctification. And this is as a factor in long-lasting relationships that many people report, is that marriage is seen as having a higher purpose. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be religious-based. It means that the couple sees a greater purpose for them to be together, whether that is based in religion or a belief in God or in a belief in something higher than themselves, more significant or greater than themselves. And that's what's important. Now, when we think about marriage in the future, and there might be different alternatives for what we might see as happening and what are some of the trends. Statistically, marriage is still on the decline. Likely the results of delayed marriages, people getting married much later in life, partly because of a tighter economic times. It's more difficult to survive economically. We like to establish careers, get our education, partly because of an increase in cohabitation before marriage. Another view is that marriage is changing to meet the needs of a changing society, moving from a patriarchal, husband-led system to something more egalitarian, more balanced. Same-sex marriages is unlikely to undermine the marriage as a whole. Cohabitation, because of the many couples involved, has had and probably will have a significant impact on marriage. Because of the value still placed on marriage, it's likely to survive into the future. Well, I hope you found this chapter helpful, and I hope you found it interesting. And you'll find when we move to the next chapter about children, connected to this, and I hope you find it as well interesting. All right? Well, take it easy and enjoy your day. Bye now.